Kang. That's so abrupt. That's such a abrupt transition. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm making my angle right. You need to see more of me.
Your angle.
That's right. That's you know what? Because if you know anything about me, I'm always camera ready. Welcome everybody back to your favorite pandemic podcast, Pencil to Pencil. I guess, is this still a podcast? Are we using old terminology? Would this be considered a live stream because we're live? And
I've been saying Pencil to Pencil live because I like the idea that people are here as part of the whole thing. That's, to me, it's the
live.
Okay.
You have to say it that way.
Okay, I'm not thinking about it like that anymore.
Yeah, so, I was thinking about, we'll do the intros in a second, but I was thinking about the terminology because, some of us are, we're kind of getting up there in age, so even maybe our some of our terminology might even be a little off.
Does it really matter?
I don't know. I think some people
is coining some term now for his thing that he's doing on TikTok, right? That's like, oh, I can't say podcast, and I can't say what Grandpa, the 30-year-old, says.
Because I don't know. Like, I remember we're going back, 10, 15 years ago when you would ask your students, any of you guys listen to podcasts? And they're like,
yeah, but if you go on whatchamacallit, the music thing.
Spotify?
Spotify.
Mm-hmm.
There's like a bajillion. They're saying podcasts. So I would say that money says podcast.
Okay.
Right.
Mm-hmm. But the kids, I don't know who these kids are.
Well,
the kids say like they
okay.
So we're streaming, right? Because I guess
we stream and then it's a podcast. We're like everything, right? We stream live, then it's a podcast.
We stream and had streams. What's the past tense of stream? Strummed. We had welcome to the live strum. Hello, guys. Welcome to the podcast. We're gonna have to we're gonna have to have a quorum about this.
We'll remove this in post. Thank God this isn't live.
Oh, I know, right? Hey, how's everybody? Hey, Pops. Welcome everybody back to the podcast. I did it again. This is Pencil to Pencil. This is a sister project of our good buddy Mike Manley's Draw! magazine. We've been doing this off and on, but more on than off, for almost 3 years, 4 years. Mike, how long have we been doing this this project?
We've been doing this live stream.
Yes.
Well, actually, at first we were recording it.
Right. We were doing Skype.
And then with this new technology, we decided to do the live stream. I think we passed 2 years in April.
Oh, wow. Where's the time go? That's wild.
Because we had started right at the beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah. And before that, we were doing, like Mike said, we were doing audio interviews recorded off of Skype. And sometimes that sounded like we were in a wind tunnel. And then other times it was like crystal clear.
Well, one of the problems was that you never knew when you talk to the person whether they have a good signal.
Yeah.
Sometimes you talk to somebody in LA and it's like Skype was like really bad in LA for some reason, and so it's like,
right. And there's no quality control. It's either it's good or it's not good, and there's really nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
But now we're in the future where I think it's still incredible that you can just log into Facebook and go live on your phone and just talk to whomever. I think that's fantastic technology.
It has good qualities and obviously very bad negative qualities at the same time.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, that's true. There are some kind of bad parts of this. But we fight the good fight here at Pencil to Pencil. Let me do our intros and then we'll get the thing started. We are your co-hosts. I'll start off. My name is JAMAR Nicholas, Philadelphia native and man of many nicknames. Um, one of my favorite Philadelphia nicknames. You ready? Kevin Scrapple, because bacon was taken. That's right, and that is for people to understand that the network is large, right? If I don't know you, and Steve Conley doesn't know you, and Mike Manley doesn't know you, that's a very small window if you think about it.
That's true.
So, but we won't dwell on that. Let's talk to our other co-host. The man at the bottom of the pyramid this time, the reverse Maslow hierarchy of needs. It's on its tip.
Reverse food pyramid.
That's reverse food pyramid.
Foundation. The foundation.
Right. The middle square, Mike Manley. Mike, how's everything going, my friend?
Good. Glad the weather's finally breaking. Because in the afternoon, like even though I had air on, the studio's still, man.
Yeah, it's still hot out there.
Still been getting hot, Still baking. So
yeah,
looking forward to the 90-degree fall.
Yeah, it's funny. There's already leaves on the ground outside on my block. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And I would be remiss if I did not mention WWE World Champion Stone Cold Steve Conley.
Hey guys, it's good to see you. Good to see you.
Cartooning champion.
T-shirt, Steve.
Steve, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
And
off.
I'm for the vast majority of the planet who don't know who I am. My name's Steve Conley. I'm the cartoonist of the webcomic The Middle Age. Free to read online. It's on Webtoons, Tapas. I'm kind of the web guy in this trio.
But and also you're probably the best at self promotion because I know I can do my dance, I can do my rap, but
You
you're
have
like
all the self-promotion plates constantly spinning.
But Steve goes right into it. He's like, "Hi, I'm Steve Conley. You may know me from such films as."
But I keep it short. I try to keep it short. I don't want to. I'm here to listen. I'm here to learn. That's what I'm here.
And what we're going to do for you fine penciliers, as our regulars are called, is this week we're going to come to you with some expert banter. And now, because of Steve Conley, who has a lot of masterful ideas, we have a prompt for today's episode. And just to let people know, we come to you live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. EST. So put it on your calendar. Like us, subscribe, hit the bell, and all that algorithm-y things. And tonight's prompt is, Steve, you want to tell them what the prompt is?
The comics that inspire us.
Comics that inspire us. So, Steve threw that into the wind, and I was like, "Yo, that's kind of dope." When we don't have a guest, because if you're new to the podcast, you may be looking for someone else. Like, who are they going to talk to? But I think we're interesting enough to just talk to each other. What do you think about that? But when we don't have a guest, we're going to come up with either we might bring back the boot camps in some iteration, Mike, or maybe there'll be some live drawing. Maybe we could get Steve Conley to do some 3D sculpting on air. Maybe I'll draw some stuff.
The whole army of people, Steve.
And but tonight I like this idea of prompts. So we're going to share a couple of the things that kind of really got our juices flowing. Maybe currently in your kind of matrix of things that you look forward to, or as I like to call it, your stack. Like you have the stack of books somewhere either in your studio or next to your nightstand, and you just kind of keep on deck. You never really put them away. And, we're all recording from our studios, and Steve has a great backdrop, and Mike's got all types of stuff going on back there. But there's always like a little pile of things that just doesn't seem to make it back to the show. So I thought maybe we'd kick the ball around for a little bit, talk to you, see what the chat thinks of it, and maybe they'll throw in some of their own, and we can have a nice discussion. So Mike, maybe I'll start picking on you. Do you have a strip or a cartoon series or illustrations or comic books that inspire you? Want to share something?
Yeah. and I thought the reason why this would be a good subject is that we all have stuff that inspires us, but we also have those days where you need a little inspiration. You need a little bit of a muse. Some people get artist block, and they're like, and some artists I know have, like you said, they have a little stack of, like some guys draw with comics right on their desk, right there, stuff that's like right there, that some artists have almost like a crutch, and you get stuck like, oh, let's see what this person did, let's see what that person did. I think more so when you're younger and you're starting out and you don't have maybe as much experience or as much confidence. My house, anybody who knows me, my house is basically books, right? I mean, I don't know how many bookshelves I have, but it's basically just full of books.
That's like one of the Three Little Pigs, right? I'll build my house of books.
Exactly.
Of bud plant catalogs.
Yeah, I remember we used to get those. Yeah. So I was thinking, it used to be comics, and I would say one of the comics that was really important to me when I was 15 when it started coming out was heavy metal.
Okay.
Because it was unlike anything in the United States, right? Like I had seen Richard Corbin before, who was in heavy metal, and I'd seen maybe a couple of the other artists, but I'd never seen Mobius. And I remember going into the Eye of Agamotto and picking up heavy metal #1.
That's a great comic book store name.
And just being, my head just exploded. Because, I mean, I knew, Frazetta and Kirby and Adams and Wrightson, and, I knew all the American guys. And I knew a lot of the Spanish artists through the Eerie and the Creepy and all the Warren publications. But I had never seen Mobius, and that changed my life. It changed, I think, what I thought comics could be, because I had never seen anything like that. Right? I had never seen anything that came from such a completely different direction, and so books, since I didn't go to school, books were very important to me. One of the books I had was the Studio book that came out.
Oh, wow.
And it's long since been out of print, but it was great because it was basically a book that covered the Studio that had Wrightson, Jeff Jones, Barry Windsor Smith, and Mike Kaluta. And it was more about like their, not only their commercial stuff, but like their fine art work. This came out, I think it was still in high school when this came out, but it had a really huge impact on me. I know this book is hard to find now. It's very expensive. Let's see what it says here. Came out in 1979.
What?
So I was in 11th grade when this came out. So if you can ever find a copy, it's definitely worth getting.
Who is the publisher, Mike?
It is.
I think the logo is on the bottom back, right?
Yeah, it's Dragon's Dream.
Right. They did a lot of stuff that was great.
Yeah. This was like $12.50. Of course, $12.50 was more money back then. But yeah, the only problem is that the binding is terrible. So slowly over time it starts coming. But this was a very important book. Had a lot of great. I'm sort of afraid to page through.
Yeah.
Because I don't want it to fall apart. That was a very important book, along with Wrightson's A Look Back book that came out right around the same time. And I remember that was a big deal for me because I had to actually save, I think it was $40. $40 when you're 17 and you're making, what was minimum wage, just like $2.25 or something.
Yeah, that's real. Yeah.
Yeah, while to save. The other books that were really important were the original Art of Frazetta books.
Sure.
Right, that one. Here's another one. This is book 2. I have them all. But
Wow.
actually, I think I have multiple copies of a couple of them. But these just, again, fried my imagination and showed me. Frazetta is one of those artists that connects a lot of things. He connects illustration, like Howard Pyle, MC Wyeth, with comics and pulp. And he's an artist that is so influential. Like, there would basically be no fantasy art today without.
Sure.
And it's sort of interesting on Instagram. His granddaughters, and I think his daughter-in-law, they have websites and they have Instagram. And, and every day, some 15-year-old is going like, whoa, who's this guy? Right? Even though he's been dead since, 2010, I think. He's just an amazing artist that he just keeps going on and influencing and influencing and influencing. And Mobius was the same way, right? I think he influenced so many people in America after heavy metal came out. You can really see a change in what people thought that they could do, or the range that they could do as artists. So those couple of books were like really important to me as far as showing you what else you could do. You know what I mean? Like I used to hunt. There used to be old bookstores in Ann Arbor where I grew up. And so I used to hunt old bookstores. And every once in a while you would find like a Frazetta paperback that was not in one of those books yet. Right? And so I would buy paperbacks just because there were covers by him or other artists like John Berkey or people like that. So, since there was no internet, you go up this week, they just bought a collection, you rifle through it, you may find something interesting, you may not find something interesting, but you just never knew. It was like a treasure hunt, right? And like the internet now is like the endless treasure hunt, but it's kind of easy because you just go, Frank Frazetta, and then bing, everything that was ever in print, you can find. It's kind of crazy.
Let me ask a question of you, Mike, in the room, because like it or not, or I like it. One of the cool things I love about doing this project is that, and I may have said this on one of the previous podcasts, is that this is a great intersection of different generations of cartoonists. Mike's a little older than us. Steve and I are kind of around in the same age pool. We're kind of like somewhere in there. But there's people that are older than Mike, and there's obviously people younger than us. And we all can kind of come together and share this information. But sometimes I like to play the layman, the kid in the room who has no idea what anything is. And I'm curious to ask, especially about something as specific as Frazetta. and I say Frazetta and maybe Boris and people like that seem to have come from a really strong genre of, painting or an aesthetic that had its moment. Not to say that is over, but when I think of Frazetta as a layman, I go, oh, like airbrush van art. That's Frazetta stuff to me. You know what I mean? So do you see, especially because like everything's always been regurgitated, we're going through another 80s renaissance, that you think that young people may discover Frazetta because of Kate Bush on Stranger Things, and that kind of aesthetic is kind of coming back? Or even like the Thor movies, like they're really pressing down on certain kind of like, I don't know, vibes of art. I don't know if that makes sense, or if anybody has an answer to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that happens in cycles is stuff will become popular, then it will go away. Then suddenly, at some point, a group of people, like, look what happened with vinyl. Like, vinyl was everywhere, then it kind of went away, but then you had this whole group of sort of like DJs, and people kept it going because that was a big part of their thing, was having vinyl. And now vinyl's kind of come back, right? That became an aesthetic. That was an aesthetic. Cassette tapes are evidently coming back. So I think with art, it goes in cycles, because like I think about every 20 or 30 years, you get another cycle of a generation that's separated enough that they can find something, or just rediscover something in a way that seems unique, right? Like people really got into Art Nouveau in the 60s, right? Because it had this sort of, they thought it had like a psychedelic aspect to it, right? Not, and now this generation, younger generation, was sort of going through a 60s thing, which means that they're going to discover that. They're going to discover that imagery, right? But I think somebody like Frazetta is such a touchstone, because as long as they're making video games with barbarians and they're making, Dungeons and Dragons, he's like the stuff that everybody's looking at. You know what I mean? All the artists are still looking at him, right? Or looking at people that look like Brahm or whoever Brahm influenced, right? I mean, you look at Brahm, well, you're still looking at echoes of Frazetta. I mean, it's like you can't, there's really no way to escape it. Even if he's so influential that even if you don't know him, you're never going to know him, you're still influenced by him, because he influenced everybody who came after him, I mean,
can I ask you a question about, so talk about comics that inspire you. Like, look, thinking about that subject, thinking about the book that would inspire you. What are you looking for as inspiration? What do you think of? What is it? Are you looking for something that's maybe something like a project that's analogous to what you're working on? Is it something that's completely different from what you're working on? Is it a something that cleanses the palate? Do you I'm gonna crack open Garfield because it's like, or I'm gonna go, a manga, something that's just not your style, not your thing. What do you look for? What is inspiration? What do you want inspiration to do for you?
I think it could be any reason, right? I mean, like, I don't necessarily sit down and think, oh, manga or whatever, but I look at anime stuff. I mean, I love Akira. That was a huge thing in the 80s when it came by. Again, like sort of like Mobius. Like that was the first, even though I had seen anime and I had seen manga, that was the first one that resonated with me, right? Because I knew people who in the early 80s were bringing over stuff. I think we talked about it before. They had like anime clubs, early anime clubs, where they had a friend in Japan who would send stuff over. And they would make their own dubs and stuff like that. So I briefly dated a girl, and she was part of that club. So I was seeing a lot of that stuff, and I liked it. But Akira was the first thing that really like that stuck.
Did you feel like, are there certain works like that, certain inspirational works that like you can tell, here's my art style, and then, oh, I experienced this project, I experienced this artist, and it careen in a different direction. You could see that moment where, oh no, it's changed my DNA.
Yeah. I think I definitely think that. I think I was also a bit schizophrenic as a kid with that, because I was so influenced by animation, but I was also influenced by, like Jack Kirby and Neil Adams, who are sort of at like the polar opposites.
Sure.
Right. And then people like Mort Drucker and Wally Wood and Mad Magazine. But I also love Chuck Jones and the stuff he did with Maurice Noble. And I realized the older I got, like how fundamental that is to my DNA as an artist. Even though I'm not sitting down and drawing anything that looks like a Chuck Jones cartoon, it's a primary pillar inside of me. And I think as you get older, you will find that there's stuff that you go, well, that is influential to me, even though it doesn't look like anything that I'm doing. It still actually can be very important to you, right? It's not like, okay, if I look at Neil Adams now, I'm just going to draw like Neil Adams. And if I look at Joe Kubert, or I look at John Byrne or, Jim Lee or whoever, I'm just going to draw like that person. You can do that, but I think your tastes also change as you get older. And I always liked cartoony stuff as much as I loved realistic stuff. So, now I think I'm very clear-minded on the idea that I could look at an artist, let's say someone like Tezuka or Milton Caniff, right? Milton Caniff. But I don't want to draw like Milton Caniff, right? Or like Frank Robbins. I love Frank Robbins. I don't necessarily want to draw like Frank Robbins, but I love Frank Robbins. I can get things from Frank Robbins.
Right.
And I think when you're younger, you think like, well, if I can't totally take this guy, this artist, and completely apply him, you know what I mean?
Right.
Then no. I don't want to have anything to do with that artist. I think it's really easy when you're younger to just push off stuff because you go like, oh yeah, no, I don't. You don't really take it in. You don't look at it. You don't appreciate it. Even if it's something that you don't want to do. And I'm way more like that. Even more like that now than I was probably even 10 years ago.
You know what I think is funny about what we're talking about is, and I think us all being expert cartoonists, am I right? Is that I think people try to find a ley line, and I'm sure as we go through this episode, people are going to go, "Huh, I wouldn't think that for you," because I think people try to find some sort of correlation to your style from the things that you enjoy. Kind of like what Mike was saying. It's like just because I read these things or I enjoy this certain storytelling style doesn't mean I want to draw like it.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I think those things are pretty separate. But it is a very interesting conversation. Well, Steve, answer your own question. What do you look for in do you look for inspiration? Okay, I'm gonna run this back. when you're walking through a store or somebody gave you like the Stuart Inn catalog or something like that, and you're like blah blah blah. Oh, what's that? What is that dopamine hit that is making you pay attention? Is it just art? Is it the title? Is it something fresh that you're not used to seeing?
It's you. I think it's. I haven't put too much thought into it. Initial response would be, it's a style of art that blows me away, and that's just pure like attraction. It's not like it's not conscious. It's more like, oh, that I like that, And then the other part is if it's clever. Like if I see something which is, this is smart. This is not necessarily what I do, but wow, is there a lot to learn? This person's a master. It's not my fighting style, but they're a master, and I can appreciate that mastery. And maybe there is something in what they do that I can apply to what I'm doing. So those are the two things mostly. It's, I think, but I know there's automatically this kind of like, I want that, whatever that
Right.
first thing you do, see that picture and you're like, oh wow, that drawing's beautiful. And then the other part is the kind of like the far more like, oh, there's a lot I can learn from that. This person's attacking the problem from a way I've never thought about.
I just had this vision, Steve, of that meme where you're walking with your books next to you, and you're looking at the butt plant
at that collection of Frazetta. Yeah.
Steve, what about
walking with Frazetta books and turning and looking at a new collection of Frazetta books?
Well, I do like what you said, Mike, about how inspiration being so divergent and how important that is, because I do think a lot of times an artist is often like, has got these, I think of it as this kind of like, if there's a diagram, the artist is in the middle and all their influences are around them, pulling on them.
Sure.
And they're in the middle. And if all their influences are basically the same, they're going to be pulled in that direction to be a copy of that thing. If
Well, isn't there's that pie chart that has all the influences, and then there's like the center?
Oh, what was that? What was that? The you versus artist or whatever that Twitter
Art
thing
versus
was.
art.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess that's more of like.
Or your influence map.
Yeah, that was like a couple years ago. Kind of
right.
like,
So you had like 9 or 10 squares, and you put.
That's interesting. But to me, the interesting thing is the weight that each one of those has. Like, you can look at someone and go, okay, they're Jim Davis and Frazetta might be both equally influential to Dave Dorman, but we can tell which one's got stronger pull on his style. I mean, that sort of thing. That very painterly style, very fantasy, very hyper realistic, but not. I mean hyper in terms of like finish. I mean in terms of like I don't know, the equivalent of I don't know, melodramatic style.
Yeah, I mean, just even in my own career, when I started self-publishing and I did the more humorous stuff, people were like, "Oh, you do this humor? I just thought you did, grim Batman or whatever," sure. Because they had never seen that, right? And so again, somebody's favorite cartoonist might be, somebody that their work doesn't even look like at all, but that doesn't mean that person is not very influential. I think it's not like, oh, like I said, like you're like the super adaptoid, that Kirby character, that sure. It was like, I got Captain America's shield and I got, Hawkeye's bow and, I got this other. It's like, you're not like that. It's not like, oh, I'm going to take Frazetta's hair and, Neil Adams' forearms. And, it's not quite like that. You know what I mean? And you move in and out of influences too. Like when I posted on my Facebook the other day, a drawing I did at the end of high school, an X-Men drawing. It was totally like Mac and the Neil Adams style, because that was where I was at the time, right? And even though he was a huge influence on me, I would say now, he's not a direct influence in the way that he was when I was like 18. So like waxes and wanes, and there can be a person that you didn't like when you're 18 that you may come to like more as you get older, because you change and you can't really ever predict. At least I think, that's a real possibility. Maybe some people are just like Jack Davis, and you started out as Jack Davis, or Don Martin, you have like a real extreme cartoony style and you never deviate. Some people are like that, but I'm not like that. I'm not that type of artist. So,
Well, I set up a couple of props, some things that we talked a little bit about the idea of the comics that inspire you. And I had one that I go to regularly, and it's wouldn't be a surprise to many people about the, it's called The Wizard King by Wallace Wood.
Oh, yeah.
So he self-published this in the, what was it? Early 70s? 78, and it is his fantasy story. It's his Lord of the Rings.
Wait, what's this called?
It's called The Wizard King. It was also packaged as The King of the World, and there's a color version of it that I'm forgetting the name of his Tajana wood color, and but it's just gorgeous work.
I have a page from it.
I'm extremely jealous, Mike.
Steve almost lost his lunch. Right
my birthday is in two or 3 weeks, Mike. I'm just saying.
Make it happen, Manley.
So it's just gorgeous, and it's very inspiring. It's got his sense of humor. It's cartoony, but also Prince Valiant-y. You can see his, you can see the DNA of the artists that he loved in it. And Wally Wood was a huge inspiration for me. And so I go back to this regularly, especially now that I'm doing a fantasy comic of my own.
Yeah.
I hadn't really done fantasy for the longest time. And so I start this new fantasy comic. I had to look at this.
When did you get that? When did you find out about it?
I've had this maybe 30 years. Yeah, he was always inspiration because of the Thunder Agents, because of all his comic work, Daredevil and all that stuff. A huge Wally Wood fan, and the Pipsqueak, all his cartoony stuff, the Pipsqueak papers and Bucky Ruckus and all that stuff. I'm a huge fan of his forever.
Did you have the canon stuff? Did you have that?
Yeah, sure. And Sally Forth and yeah, just gorgeous stuff. But I'm still finding stuff of his that like I didn't know about because he was so. He was just producing work all the time. But The Wizard King is a book I go to all the time. It's just one that's on my shelf, maybe every 3 or 4 months. I think. Let me look at that one more time. So this one was like the first thing I could think of. That was, and again, there are again King of the World. I think Vanguard Publishing put one together. It's okay, but it's attempted to be printed a few times.
Didn't they do one in France? I think
they did. Yeah. King of the World. There you go. That's the one. So yeah, it's inspiring stuff, and I go back to it often because Wally Wood was an amazing cartoonist. He knew he could draw anything. He also had a massive swipe file, so you'll see a lot of Hal Foster poses, and also a crystal clear storyteller. Like you don't need the words to know what's going on in every panel, and that gives him the opportunity to use the dialogue for other things. Since you never have to explain what's happening, you can use the dialogue to do all these other things, and he takes advantage of that. So it's awesome.
Very nice. Thank you, Steve. Steve, give us one more. Give us another hit.
Okay. So talking about disparate influences, this is more recent. This is probably in the last 10 years. I knew Richard longer than that. Richard Thompson was a cartoonist. Yes. He did Cul-de-sac. His work is very different. His work is almost like the opposite of my style. This is cleaner because it was like a newspaper strip. His style could be described. I thought of it was loose would be generous, but it was almost sloppy. Is my initial if you come from the Wally Wood school, and you looked at Richard Thompson's illustration work, you'd think, okay, this guy is practically scribbling. But after that, after the finish of the thing, you look at it and you just start laughing because he's such a funny writer and such a funny storyteller, and the faces, the pictures, the pacing, it's just perfection. It's so funny. It's laugh out loud, you're crying funny, and then sometimes it's just pure silly.
And Steve, Richard wasn't around doing the strip that long. How long was Cul-de-sac around? Like 5 years, maybe?
Maybe. It was collected into a few books, 2 books in a slipcase collection. And there's a few other collections of his work. I got to work on the book, The Art of Richard Thompson. I was the designer on that book. And that's really when I got to know his work. Again, I'm a huge Wally Wood fan, Jack Kirby, Alex Toth. That's very clean, comic booky American comics heroic style, and Richard's very cartoony and different in his own way, much like I'd say like Mobius and Kirby kind of made his own way, kind of had his own distinct voice. And it's one of those things where if you add a little Kirby to your drawing, that's a lot of Kirby. If you add a little Mobius, that's a lot of. You add a little Richard Thompson, that's a lot of Richard Thompson. It's that sort of thing. It's such a distinct flavor. So working on the book, The Art of Richard Thompson, it just changed me forever. The reason my webcomic Middle Age looks like it does is it doesn't look like Richard Thompson, but it was like it gave me permission to just be my own kind of thing.
Yeah. Wow.
That was awesome.
Yeah, I think that's a real key thing, is that when you discover a new artist, like a Mobius or somebody, he really was sort of like giving you permission to do stuff that you had never seen anywhere else,
Right.
you know? And it's hard to, in a way, appreciate that now, because it's like you can't go back to that 1977. You know, you can't go back to that. That's one of the things that when I talk to a younger artist or younger students, it's really hard for someone who was born, you know, the last 20, 25 years to realize the world of entertainment that you live in now compared to like 1976, the year before Star Wars, right? The amount of entertainment that you had, the quality of the entertainment that you had was so small
Right.
compared to what we have now.
You could fit on a spinner rack.
Yeah. And like now you could not possibly, even if I retired tomorrow and I spent my life savings, there's no way I could watch, read, and consume all the entertainment that's being produced now. It's like amazing the amount of entertainment, you know, from books and games and movies and, you know, TV shows or streaming shows. It's just an amazing amount of material that's being produced. You know, it's like it's really, when, you know, I talk to somebody of my generation or even older, remembering. It's like Jamar posted those opening credits of G.I. Joe. You posted yesterday, right? Like, so you go and you I was never, again, that was like beyond me, but it was like you and my brother, and I knew people like Thundercats and stuff like that. And now there's so much stuff. It's like I don't know if people get hyped for it in the same way, because everybody was watching G.I. Joe, right? Or Transformers.
Because there was nothing else.
Right, yeah. When you came home from school, you had one or two channels, from 3 until, 5 or 6, and then done.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I well, Jamar, I noticed that you had a few things on your table.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
I noticed that.
Well, let me see what I have in my bag of tricks.
Uh-oh.
All right.
So, Steve, you got to help me out with the production.
All right. Let me know. I'm typing away here.
Oh, all right. Well, this will be easy. So, some of my influences are a little all over the map, and this is not an exhaustive list. These are just a couple of picks, right?
This is what you just grabbed,
right? This is kind of what I just grabbed off the top shelf. So a part of my origin story, I like to talk about this a lot when I get interviewed, is I talk about how I originally was a comic strip fan as a young Jamar. I was really into the newspaper strips, and comic books came a lot later. So I'm not a traditional comic book fan. I'm a strip guy. So when I was way too young to know what I was reading, I was a big fan of Doonesbury. And this is, I don't know if you could,
yeah.
Hold on. I can do the thing here. I can do it. So, pardon the purple. This is the Doonesbury Chronicles with some dust on it. With the jacket. This is, I think, the first Doonesbury collection. And this has to be like 79, something like that.
So how old were you?
This is 75. Holy shit. I think I was probably like 5 or 6 and I really got into Doonesbury. So
you were reading it in the newspaper?
Yes. Yeah, I was reading it. It was an affiliate. Look at Trudeau. He's like 5 years old.
Mhm.
But yeah, I was reading this in the Philadelphia Inquirer, and what I love, and this is so funny, like this stuff is so old Trudeau. What I loved about it was just that Trudeau had his own visual language that he was doing, and it was very conversational. It was less like a one panel strip like Family Circus or something like that. It was um, almost like a moment in time, like conversation style. And I also love that he would change things in the background from panel to panel. Like there'd be a framed picture of Ronald Reagan hanging up, and then by the last panel would be Kissinger in the frame. And you saw a lot of Berkeley Breathitt took stuff from Trudeau for Bloom County. You kind of saw the same kind of like aesthetic, not necessarily of a design or a line style, but just kind of messing with the universe and kind of creating their own language. So I was a big Doonesbury fan.
When you were reading it, were you aware? Okay, I mean, like if you put Richard Nixon in there or you put Ronald Reagan in, were you aware of who those people were?
I knew who Jimmy Carter was, and I think that was about it. It's not like I was up watching, the news every night.
You weren't wearing a T-shirt with Spiro Agnew on the front.
And for some of you old Jamar traditionalists, that's kind of where I cribbed the name of the Jamar Chronicles from.
Oh.
And this is just, the strip was called Doonesbury, but this was like an early collection. And remember when there wasn't a whole section in the bookstore just for collected cartoon trades? It was all in the humor section. And it just might be, I remember in Walden Books, they had these very interesting kind of like smaller size paperback trades of Doonesbury seasons. And I would just collect them. I don't know what the hell I was reading, but I was enthralled with his storytelling.
Did you like things about like the way he drew eyes or things?
Yes. Yeah, all of that. Like Trudeau's stuff. Look at this. This makes no sense. Like these people don't look real, but then they don't look like anybody else either, which I felt was such fantastic mastery. Like he created his own language. Like look at BD and Zonker in the window.
Like everybody has that sort of sleepy eye.
Yeah. Also I love, and this was probably aesthetic I'm still stuck with, how Trudeau was handling his collections and his covers. He was always mixing kind of media. Like this is a photo, then
right.
Cut out with the strips in it. Like it's just brilliant stuff. But yeah, that sounds pretty dorky for a young black kid in West Philly to be really into Doonesbury. But I have some more, but we can kick the ball around a little bit more.
No, keep going. Go.
Okay, all right. So also this one, a lot, Mike, I'm always talking about this with you. You might know this. Where'd the other one go? I'm a giant fan of Paul Grist. Collie was like, Paul Grist is a English cartoonist, probably more known in the States for, what was it for, like Jack Staff?
Jack Staff.
Yeah, which was like an analog of Captain Britain, which I think is hilarious.
I think it started as a pitch for Captain Britain. I think
is that what it was?
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm a giant fan of Kane. I had all of these in floppies, and then I bought all the trades, and I've lost them. I've given them to people, and I don't get them back. So this might be the series that I've bought the most. And I'm sure there are people in the room that have bought things more than once, because they're just like, yo, you got to read this. And then they never get it back.
So good.
So one of the things that I love about Toth, I said Toth, that was like a Freudian slip, about Grist's line work is real sparse, and it's got he has a real mastery of spotting blacks, as we say in the business. There's a lot of Toth in his work. And also maybe Miller, because people always seem to forget about Frank Miller when they talk about doing a lot of heavy black spotting. But just how, like, I don't know if you could see the dude in there.
Yeah.
Like it's just It's fantastic composition. Let me see if I can find you a page. Also, his writing and storytelling is fantastic. What did he also did? I think he did some Doctor Who books. And then I know he did Mudman for Image.
Right.
And he's done a bunch of stuff, but he has his fans. But he's kind of like he's like a best kept secret.
Yeah, he's brilliant. Brilliant work. And I love those balloons. I love they bounce around the page. And
yes. Sorry, I'm not handling this camera well.
Oh, I can do it. I can do it. I think I can do it. How do I do this? Wait.
Oh, there you go. So yeah, and also I do love hand drawn balloons. That's something, and and I think that's something that you're starting to lose, like people doing their own hand lettering.
Well, it's time consuming.
Yeah.
Right. It's time consuming, and it's not easy. But it's something that all the old cartoonists could do.
Yeah.
I mean, that was pretty standard back in the day.
Yeah. But now, like, I used to hand letter my own stuff, but I started to get that claw, and I was like, I can't do this much longer. Here's one more.
Wow. Yeah, I love how also, I mean, it feels sparse, like it's like clean, like not a lot of background, but there's always just enough background that it doesn't feel lazy.
Yeah.
I think it'd be real easy for that to feel like it's phoned in or something, but it never does. It's always so well considered, and it's always great.
Look at that.
Anytime you do sort of an offshoot of the line Claire style, where you basically have line, black, and no rendering.
Yeah.
It always looks sharp, and it looks modern, and it tends to not to look
at that.
Old-fashioned.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great stuff. So I think you'd fall in love with the stories too.
And he did something that I'd only ever seen Hugo Pratt do, which was really play around with expectations of scale, because once you get into cartooning, there's no real sense of scale. It's like it's a cartoon drawing. Is that beautiful drawing of a car model? Is it a full-size car? And they really played around with expectations. There's one story of his where you're seeing something again and again, and you have an expectation as to what it is, and at the end you see it, and it's not what you think.
Yeah.
And only cartooning could do that.
All right, last one. So, and also Gris is calling back on a lot of kind of like American comic tropes. Like there's a lot of Sin City in here on purpose.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So like there's nothing's an accident here, but he makes it his own too. Somebody in the chat, I think it was Eternity, said his stuff reminds you of Mike Avon Oming. And I'm sure Oming kind of has a shelf with Grist on it too. And also JRD, what's up, JRD, says Grist is a master of negative space. Very cool. All right. Am I doing one more or what? What are we doing?
Yeah, go ahead. Do one more.
All right. And guys, I hope you're enjoying the live stream podcast thingy, what we're doing. If you have some questions for us, or if you want to share some more on what your favorite inspirations are, please chime in. And Mike, there was a question for you earlier in the broadcast. I'll see if I can get to it. It was a little off topic, but I didn't forget. Oh, JRD says Ketchum. No, I do Dennis the Menace to death. Everybody knows I'm a giant Hank Ketchum fan. And I do study Ketchum a lot, but I wanted to mix it up a little bit. So here's my last pick.
Wow, of course, beautiful.
Can we just do this for a second? You'd love the stack. You'd love to see it. That's ridiculous. Look at that. I don't know if I have to really go into bone, but going back again to the history of cartooning, right? And we talk about, the strips. Walt Kelly's Pogo was a giant influence on Jeff Smith. And if you've never read Pogo, and I bothered Mike to death about Pogo, like, let's talk about Pogo. And I remember, Steve, is the Jeppy Museum still in Baltimore? Is that going?
I don't know anymore. I don't know.
There were at the Steve Geffey Museum, there was a Walt Kelly original like page, and it was like twice up. It was magnificent, but you can just see there's a straight ley line from Walt Kelly stuff into Jeff's work in Bone, and I remember when Bone was probably one of the biggest, besides the Ninja Turtles, like independent Marvels in comic books for a long time. And his stuff seemed so fresh, and the storytelling was so fresh. The more on this art thing, and the cartoons was like, oh, like that's Walt Kelly. You know what I mean? Like you immediately put those things together.
From Walt Kelly, you skip right into Disney because Kelly worked for Disney.
Yeah,
and you can go back, and again, you can go back to the root of what the Disney artists were coming up with, what they were doing in the, like Floyd Gottfredson was doing in the Mickey Mouse newspaper strip.
Yeah.
There's so many Disney things. Like look at the girl's face. I mean, it's like you're looking at Alice in Wonderland.
Mm-hmm. Again, and we'll talk about spotting blacks. And I think it's interesting that like an old cartooning thing is, what do you call it, Mike? Inking for color, right? Like all of this work in here just reads black and white. Now I know that Scholastic has turned these books into color, and I haven't read a lot of the color work because this is kind of where my imagination lays right here with the black and white stuff.
I'm sure they colored it because they figured, well, the kids would like it better as color.
And there's probably a lot of truth to that.
Yeah.
But they're almost like looking at two different things. So I think it's important as cartoonists to understand the power of black and white images and also, the power of color. I think there are two different conversations that you can have.
Well, it's very different today because when I got in the business in the 80s, you wanted your work to work as black and white because you were never sure who was going to color it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you didn't have a good amount of black, you didn't make things read. Now the colorists can do so much, they can almost do too much. They can overpower the line work.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very different aesthetic now coming in as a young cartoonist where you have great coloring, right? You can always have great coloring. My first several jobs had the world's worst coloring. My first job was on that flexographic printing press they did in the 80s. Oh my God, that was like the worst printing ever. Oh my God. So wouldn't you, it could destroy Jack Kirby's work, it was so bad. But that was the sort of the thing that they would tell you, that you wanted your work to read without the color.
Right. And this is something I wanted to bring up when you were talking about Akira earlier, that, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think I'm right, is that the Marvel epic Akira adaptations was the first use of digital color in American comic books. I think that was Olaf, right?
Yeah.
Steve Olaf did that.
Yeah.
Oleoptics, right? Was that what it was? And I think also I saw Akira in the theater, but I was in love with the Marvel epic adaptations. I'd never seen anything like that before, and even like my self-published stuff, like I totally bit the giant Akira title for JAMAR Chronicles. I'm spilling all my secrets now, but it was just the stuff was so stark in photorealistic in a cartoony way, if that makes sense. I don't know a good way to explain Otomo's work, in the manga, but it's just it grabs you by the throat.
Yeah.
and it doesn't let go.
Well, it's like the faces are cartoony,
Right.
but everything else is kind of straight.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Right.
grounded. It's grounded, but you feel the emotion of the faces. They really,
Yeah.
you know,
And
makes-
you know, and if I could give an honorable mention, kind of going to manga for a second, Kenichi Sonata's Gunsmith Cats. I love Gunsmith Cats. Gunsmith, I'm getting tongue tied. Gunsmith Cats is so dope, where you could tell that Sonata is drawing his loves. The actual characters in this comic are like the most bare bones manga analogs, but the city, it looks like Chicago, like he drew Chicago, and the muscle cars in every part of a weapon, he's drawn the detail. You know, so it's, I don't know, that's magnificent. I know there's people that like the anime, but go pick up those Dark Horse collections of Gunsmith Cats. The stuff is dope. Sorry, Mike, I kind of took over there for a second.
No. That I mean, I have a few of them I came across a year or two ago. But yeah, I mean, everybody has that 5 or 6 or 10 books that are really influential. You
Yeah.
go back and you look at them over again,
Mm-hmm.
see them in a different way. You know, like now when I look at heavy metal, I can look at that Arzak or
Mm-hmm.
one of my favorite stories, A Long Tomorrow,
Mm-hmm.
which is the springboard for Blade Runner.
Mm-hmm.
You see things in it at different points in your life. Like when you're younger, you tend to just look at the surface, like the rendering or the drawing, the style, because that's generally what draws you to an artist when you're young. It's that's cool. That's like a cool drawing. But then you can look at, like when you were talking about the things with Kane,
Mm-hmm.
or even Trudeau. Then you start, and later on, you can start looking at the architecture.
Yeah.
You look at what's holding up the surface, what's beneath the surface.
Mm-hmm.
When you can get to that point, then you can actually start learning what actually is really important about that person's work.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like for me now, when I look at something like Bone, it's like a straight shot right back to Disney.
Mm-hmm.
Foundations
Mm-hmm.
of the principles of construction and appeal that Disney perfected. Right? And you can see that in Walt Kelly. You can see that in Hank Ketchum. Both those guys work for Disney.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And you can see that appeal in presentation, in aesthetics, is primary in their work. And anyone who worked or was influenced by Disney, appeal is the primary influence that is carried from them, because their work is always very appealing. You know,
Mm-hmm.
Mickey Mouse is very appealing. Donald Duck, those Italian guys, the Mexican guys I was showing you on Instagram,
Mm-hmm.
super appealing Disney work that these guys produce. You know?
Yeah.
And when you're looking at a lot of the anime stuff, there's a lot of that root of appeal that comes from the history of manga and the original people being influenced by the Disney stuff, that appeal. That's what appealed to them, was that appealing way, like the way Tezuka drew Astro Boy was directly influenced by Mickey Mouse.
Mm-hmm.
To things on his head, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so you realize as you get older and you can look beneath just the surface of things, those principles are universal. And you can find them reflected in a lot of artists,
Mm-hmm.
despite styles might be very different.
I have one more, and now you got me monologuing. And you know what? I had to like stop collecting the stuff because I felt like I was hoarding it.
Hoarding it?
Yeah, like I it's funny. I remember back before the anime explosion. Remember, I don't know if your place was like this. You could like rent VHS tapes of anime from the comic book store, at least in my neighborhood, and like you go home and dub them and return the tape. But like, it was really cool where there was only so much stuff and you could still had a chance to have seen things. This is almost like the end of the come home after school to watch G.I. Joe type of thing. There was stuff was kind of coming quickly, but you could still kind of handle the tide. And at some point all this stuff started to just kind of like fuzz together. So when people talk about manga and anime, I don't have a lot of dogs in that fight because I just don't watch enough of it anymore. And there's like young people who could like otaku kids that could go in on all this stuff. I'm kind of out of that conversation. But there are a couple of things that really stand out to me, and I think it's to Mike was saying. There's kind of a callback to something else. There's an aesthetic that is just undeniable. And one of my favorite anime is Giant Robo, right? Which is a callback to Johnny Sacco. It is Flying Robot, right? Which also
round anime style.
What is it? The Big O? Like, I think there were a bunch of people from Giant Robo who did Big O, and there's people who just love Big O who never saw Giant Robo. But anyway, and one of my other things before I really kind of knew about the whole anime thing, which is a little bit in between Speed Racer and Marine Boy, was Inspector Gadget. And Mike knows I'm a giant Inspector Gadget nerd. But Kia Asamiya, who did Steam Detectives, was kind of touching on something. Like, I don't have an image, but in this manga, there was like there was a giant robot with a soul, and then there was a little kid detective with a trench coat with the big Inspector Gadget buttons on his coat, and he had like a gadget gun, and like all of these things just kind of hit these notes, and it's beautiful, and the work is beautiful, kind of like Sonata stuff. But I can't say that I love all of this stuff. There's just so much. But there's like very specific things that I love. Wowzers.
Jamar, you should look on the internet.
Right. Yeah, Eternity. So Johnny Sacco and Giant Robo are really the same thing. It's kind of like a retelling. Right, yeah. A retelling of the same thing. So
I remember as a kid, they would, in Detroit, on Channel 7, they would have the 4:30 movie. And every couple months, it would be like a week of Godzilla or Gamera. And then they would play Johnny Sacco. And I was like, it was kind of like weird because it almost seemed like kind of like Ultraman. But, then I was like, oh, that's like Frankenstein Jr. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, Hanna-Barbera saw Johnny Sacco and said, oh, yeah, we'll do Frankenstein Jr., we'll do the same thing, except, he had the same, like the wristwatch, the kid, Buzz, he would talk to him, the same thing. And then Frankenstein Jr. had buttons on the back of his head.
Mm-hmm.
He could press. I watched some of those recently. Like within the last couple of years, I actually showed Mimi a couple of them. Mm-hmm. They're awful. They're terrible cartoons.
Yeah.
The Frankenstein Jr.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
That was my shit right there, boy. When I was 5, it was like, man. And I think I even had like a Frankenstein Jr. coloring book. And that was like, oh, man, that was like the best thing ever.
You're in it.
Yeah. You watch him as an adult, you go like, you had to be 5.
Is that like Clutch Cargo cartoons with the lips? So let's talk to the chat for a minute. Our best bud, Eternity Forever, said, "What? I just had this flashback. Was it Ron Fred's who was like Eternity Forever in the chat? Like one of that. It was really great." It says, "I wonder how going back to the Bone collection being colored, and there being like I think there's fans of either of those. It's the same book." but there's like a color version and a black and white version that almost have a different vibe to them.
Oh yeah.
So
Sure.
Eternity says, I wonder how much that's true if kids want or like color. Kids eat up the 120 black and white page manga by the millions, which is true. But I also wonder, and maybe we could discuss this, I wonder if the heavy influence on being comfortable reading manga and not looking for the color is something that's less American than other countries. You know what I mean?
I think you buy the whole aesthetic. If you're really into buying, if you're really into like a certain kind of shoe or whatever, and they say these shoes come with no tassels, and you're really into it, you buy into it, right? Like so, like you can't find that stuff in color. So if you really like the old school Naruto, you're only going to get it in black and white because they're not putting it out in color. And part of that appeal is like, I found this special thing.
It's a special.
Accept the black and white, you know. But I do think that's kind of unique to the Japanese stuff. I still think that most American readers want things in color. Artists love things in black and white. Like I love those old black and white Warren magazines, and I love the fact that they were in black and white because you could really see the line work. I just like that whole aesthetic. But the average person, the average reader, wants it to be in color.
Our buddy Gar says, I came to Bone very late. First time I saw it was the colored version, the Scholastic version. So I actually prefer the colored version. The black and white Bone is stunning, but I dig the colored version more. That's interesting. Thanks, Gar. Steve, you got a dog in this fight?
I think it's a couple of things. It's about expectations, probably. I mean, manga, a lot of that stuff starts off with a couple of color pages, then gets in the black and white. It's I think it really is just expectations. Again, it's like dealing with webtoons or the direct market. You're selling to a bunch of different people, and I bet that Scholastic was probably looking at like, okay, we could probably sell it in black and white. It's lovely in black and white. We're buying it in black and white. You know, it's already won all the Eisners in black and white. So, but we also have to sell it to kids. We have to sell it to bookstores. We have to sell it to libraries, and they want color books. And it's not just the audience; it's all these other people who say that, you know, if it's black and white, is it professional? There's all these layers to a thing, and Steve Hamaker, I think, did the color on Bone, and it's lovely. It's lovely. It's so I mean, it's not. It would be. We've seen bad color work and how it can ruin something, as Mike was talking about. He didn't do that. You know, he is faithful in adaptation with Jeff's blessing as you could have. So
I also think that just my experience as a teacher, the kids accept manga being in black and white because that's how they get it. That's how they see it. When they hunt it down on the internet, that's what it comes. Also, a lot of young people, college-age people, have a resistance to certain things like black and white film, which I always found very odd, because if you watch a video and it's in black and white, that's cool, right? That's like aesthetic or whatever. But I did have students, there was some discussion amongst some of the faculty that when you would take a film class, right, or you want to be an animator, you'd have to take a film class, you've got to watch some films, and some of the films are not going to be in color. And there were some students that just like couldn't wrap their brain around the fact that I got to sit down and watch 90 minutes of something in black and white, which I myself always struggle to understand, like why that was a problem.
Well, it's also an indication of, for the most part, indicates the age of a thing, and the age, and because pacing is picked up so much, you can watch something from 20, 30 years ago, and it's like, wow, is this crawling? And stuff that's black and white, it wasn't necessarily that it was unattractive. I mean, there's nothing wrong with, you know, Casablanca, not a frame wrong with Citizen Kane, but you also know it's going to have a slower pace, and you're basically asking people to sit through the kind of melodramatic music the kind of all the cheesiness that came with that era. And I don't know, you're basically asking people to go back in time when they look at that thing. So
watch Star Wars. Watch the last Star Wars film. Go and watch Star Wars. You know,
Episode 4, you mean?
Right.
I still call it Star Wars.
I knew what you meant.
And it is much slower.
Right.
There is poetry. There's a lot more David Lean in Star Wars, right? Now, just like that whole thing, like after Luke is his aunt and uncle are killed, and there's the two suns setting, and he's standing and he's looking, what's his future going to be? It's very poetic. Yeah. It's slow. It makes you think. I think modern audiences and modern readers, when they cannot appreciate that, they kind of rob themselves of some poetry.
I agree. I think that I know people who say I don't like to read. I know people who say I don't like movies. I think that's the thing is, and those are people who are exposed to bad movies and bad books. I don't think they start with a notion. They're not like inert and go, I don't like this thing I've not experienced. The stuff they've experienced was unpleasant or not to their tastes. And so when someone says I don't like black and white movies, it's because the ones they saw first were not great.
They had root beer barrels, and now they don't like.
Yeah,
they don't like root beer barrels.
So it's that kind of thing where I think the stuff that's foisted on people, especially at a young age, you might, hey, we're going to sit down and watch this holiday classic that's black and white, and that's the exposure they have to the black and white. We're like, I don't want to sit through that,
That's interesting.
I think it's that sort of thing. I want to give them the, young minds, fresh ideas, be tolerant.
Well, also, then again, like I said, as you get older, as you grow, you may find something that you didn't find appealing.
Sure.
You might have to reach a moment of artistic maturity, where you can appreciate something. I mean, I can think about that myself. When I was younger, the idea of painting a still life would have been like the most boring goddamn thing ever in the world. Would be just paint a bunch of fruit. But when I went back to college at 45, the idea of composition and mastering a technique to make that still life be evocative, well, that's a whole other challenge, right? When I was 17, I wanted to be Frazetta. When I had the art of Frazetta, I didn't see one still life in this whole book, but I know for a fact he had classical art training and he painted a lot of still lifes.
Right.
But of course, when you're 17 or you're 15 or whatever, you don't have the context. You don't understand.
Yeah, you want to paint vans, and nobody wants to draw fruit on the side of their van.
Yes, you get me a nice still life, a couple kumquats, and
He's drawing like a empty wine bottle and some oranges, right?
Like some burgundy colored drape cloth.
But it's. I always remember that because my art teacher, which I talked about before, was a bad art teacher because I wanted to be Frazetta. I wanted to produce work like that, and she thought that stuff was crap, and she wanted me to paint still lifes. The way she could have gone about it is saying, well, if you learn to do this well and you learn your technique, it helps you do the other thing. So I always think about that as a teacher, to not come down on something that a student may show me because it's not my interest or taste, to try to find a path from that
right
to the wider world, which is, again, like a lot of these artists we're talking about. If you go through that art, then you go through the next art, and then you actually end up in a wider world.
I think all that education starts that way, and it's always rough. It's like I remember in a drawing technique class, we spent I swear we spent a class just sharpening pencils with an X-Acto. I swear, it's all these. I'm sure there's a cooking class where we're going to spend the first class boiling water. It's going to be Well, you got to learn how to do it right. You have to the basics, and yeah, I get that. I get that.
So we're gonna start wrapping up. We have a couple more minutes to go in, but I think where does the time go? I always say that at the end of the episode. But I think this is really interesting, and it's cool to kind of unlock these things. But I also feel it's so exciting to always see how things always kind of point back to very specific points of light in the past. Like we talked about all of these artists, and then you could just go, "Oh, that's Disney," or "Oh, that's Tezuka." Well, that's Disney too. You know what I mean?
Yeah, or imagining what it would be like if Mike hadn't found that heavy metal. What his work would be like. There's all these there's this multiverse of Mikes where there's one who didn't find heavy metal and didn't find that other book.
Exactly, right, yeah.
What did that turn out? What kind of art is he doing?
Oh, I had a question because heavy metal wasn't really in my wheelhouse. Is that that was like a little, I guess, before my time. Like, but heavy metal was going on, but I wasn't into that. So the was it Mattel Hurlant, the French magazine, is totally different from heavy metal, right? Or do they share some DNA?
Well, it's the same thing, except there was more of a direct in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
The metal Hurlant and heavy metal was. I'd have to compare them, but issue per issue. But they were pulling the stuff right from metal Hurlant, and then I think guys like Corbin were one of the American people that went over and was in France, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he was in there. But there was like Drouillet, Kripax, I think if that's how you pronounce that first. There was a lot of artists in there that were in the original heavy metal or metal Hurlant in France. Victor de la Fuente. There were so many people in the. I have to actually go back through and look, but yeah, there was definitely much more of a translation. Then I think as it went on, not as much. I think there was maybe more American stuff, and I know they came back, although I had not seen any of the modern issues, but they were publishing again. But that was just sort of like a window into Europe. That I had, just like when you came across Asterix or Tintin,
Tonton, Les Schtroumpfs.
Right, yeah, I remember the first time I came across.
You like Les Schtroumpfs? You like that, Steve Conley?
I do indeed.
I'd never seen that before.
That thin line, that thin.
Yeah. It's just like a whole different aesthetic,
Looky Luke.
Like when you look at some of the Asterix and Lucky Luke and a lot of that school of the cartooning, again, you can see right back through to Disney, because you can see right back through the Cats and Jammer Kids. You can see that old idea of appealing cartooning. Big nose, or what they call Bigfoot, where everybody had big feet, right? So you can sort of follow the lineage, because those people were being influenced by the Disney stuff and the American. The Europeans were more influenced by the strips, right? I was influenced by comic books, later comic strips.
You flipped it with some.
Yeah,
I did. Yeah.
In America, in this generation, right? This generation, and probably I would say starting with Wrightson's generation, Walt Simonson's generation, those artists were more influenced by the comics. But you go back one generation to people like Williamson, they were influenced by the strips, by movies and the strips. Next generation were influenced by the silver Bronze Age. Right? And now, you're influenced by, of course, Naruto's probably 25 years old by now.
Naruto, One Piece, Dragon Ball. I gotta keep putting up a layup for Dragon Ball because I don't think cartoonists understand how big Dragon Ball is to the culture in America. Kids love Dragon Ball, and it's almost I hate to say it's almost a millennial thing too. A lot of people in their 30s love Dragon Ball.
There's a soup store in Orlando, Soup Cyan, and it's all themed like Dragon Ball. And it had a line out the door.
Soup Cyan. Yo, can you get me a T-shirt from there? That's amazing.
Staying in line, like powering up, and then like going
soup. Where's soup?
The sodium in this is over 9,000.
But it was actually good. Like it was ramen. It was good. So
Yo, we gotta go there, Steve.
When you go there, they just give you a hot cup, water, and your own little bag of rum. See ya.
And you get a yellow wig.
It was an unlicensed establishment. I mean, they had a food license. They didn't license anything from the copyright owners. But I love it.
Yeah. I guess that's like when I was in China. There was a store called Snoopy, and it was just Snoopy. It was like you see Snoopy, and I'm sure they were not paying anybody over here any money from that.
No, not at all.
That's funny.
So, all right, you guys, we're going to kick out. This has been a fantastic episode. Hold on, Eternity says, I have a picture of the Science Ramen Shop here in Orlando. Yes. We are going to be back next week with our long-lost guest, John Gallagher. If you remember before we went on our hiatus, John was... No, wait a minute. Yeah. Right before we went on hiatus, Gallagher was supposed to come on. And he couldn't. And that was like the second episode with Steve, right?
Yeah.
And we just kind of chopped it up, and we had a great time. But if you're not familiar, John is an old buddy of ours who's been in the business for close to 30 years. He's coming up close, or maybe 20 something. We're around. We kind of came in at the same time, right, Steve?
Yeah.
Who was really famous for his Buzzboy property, and now he has been doing a lot of great kid lit. His book, Max Meow: Cat Crusader, over at I believe it's at Random House. He's going on his 5th book. Yeah. Really proud of him, and he's doing fantastic work, and he's changing lives. And we're gonna have such a great time talking to Gallagher. He's like family.
He's great.
Yeah. So thanks for everybody for Artsy Designs for your first time watching this live podcast stream. Thank you. Thanks everybody who came in, and we hope to see you next time. For you YouTubers out there, please like, subscribe, smash that alarm alert bell so you know when we're going live. 8 o'clock. Every Wednesday, EST. Don't miss it. Don't miss the bus, Gus.
And there's a bonus stream tomorrow night, isn't there? Thursdays.
Oh, yes, that's right. Coffee break with JN right here on this channel, where you get to watch me at 9 p.m. EST. Just run my mouth and drink a cup of coffee. It's fantastic. But thank you guys. Thank you to my co-host Mike Manley. Good to see you, my friend. Steve Conley. Thank you as well. And for you guys that know how we get out of here, get ready to lather up those hands. I'm JAMAR Nicholas. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next week. But don't forget to wash those Kirby hands. We're still in a pandemic, y'all. Wash those Kirby hands. Oh, those are good hands. Nice, Steve. Thanks, guys. See you next time.
Bye.
Excelsior.